I almost think it's worse though that somebody who is educated and somebody who does fundamentally agree with these principles of our country ended up kind of selling them out for their financial bottom line.
Yeah, I mean, again, it
Do you generally believe that we should be upholding the stability of the country over like your own personal interests when you're voting for the president?
I think probably 85% of Americans go to the polling booth with the goal of protecting their own bottom line and those around them. That's obviously why throwing a bone of tax cuts to the populace has always moved the needle in elections more than anything else.
Yeah, sure. But I'm asking like what should you do? Like do you think it you have like some sort of obligation to take in mind the people that this administration will also affect?
Oh yeah, for sure. And obviously, that's like I said, it comes back to red states essentially popping themselves in the foot. I think a lot of this stuff is protected under as state level by blue states, especially these cuts being done to social safety nets, things like that. Most of that has already been subsidized at a state level in areas like New York, California, etc. However, obviously, less wealthy red states are going to be feeling the burn of cutting such a federal funding that gives them most of their money when they don't have the tax base to support it on themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And that would unfortunately, the only solution for that would be raising taxes in red states, which obviously nobody's going to be a fan of. Republicans don't like to do, and it makes it very tough to get elected in those areas.
Do you do you believe that the country would have been more stable under somebody like Kamala Harris rather than somebody like Donald Trump?
I think our country is disgustingly divided. I don't think that would have changed. I don't agree with the notion of Trump hijacking the Republican Party as a whole and remaking it in his own opinions and image.
Mm-hmm.
I think both parties are fundamentally flawed, and that comes back to the point where I think the United States of America needs ranked choice voting in order to have the most true democracy and give true power to the people.
Yeah, sure. But I mean, like, so we do function within the two party system. So unfortunately, this is something that we just have to traverse. For instance, when we're seeing like the Trump administration target people because of their political views, like literally doing viewpoint discrimination, do you think something like that would have happened under Kamala Harris, where like the Trump administration is targeting law firms that represent clients that they don't like or that are suing them for policy proposals that they put in? They're targeting them, removing grants, removing security clearances, revoking the student visas for people who are against Israel. Like, do you think that anything like that would have happened under Harris?
Well, I mean, look at unfortunately Harris was pretty deep in bed with Israel too. I don't support Trump's take on it either. I think they're both two sides of the same coin with that because of APAC. That's unfortunately what we're going to get with most politicians,
Well, we're
especially the ones that survive
not
primaries.
necessarily talking about like the general outlook towards Israel, talking about like specifically like these student immigrants who are protesting against Israel are going to get their student visa revoked because I think they're going against national interest. Like, I don't think that would have happened under Kamala Harris because it didn't happen under Joe Biden.
Yeah, no, probably not. Students protesting like that, but I would say there would definitely be red state pushback with many of the policies that Kamala would like to enact, and any Democrat would like to enact. And because of the divided state of our country now, there will always be, people trying to get a gotcha and go after political dissent on either side.
But
Obviously, not to the extreme.
when the red state protests would pop up, inevitably against the Democrat leadership, I agree that that would happen. But do you think that Kamala Harris would do something like federalize the National Guard against the will of the governor in order to quell those protests?
I mean, if another January 6th happened, I think she should. Obviously, that was disgusting.
Mm-hmm.
If it reached the extent of such protests that would call for it, I think it should. But it comes back to more of a problem of going after red states trying to push their own ideology that may differ from the executive branch as a whole.
In what ways do you think Kamala Harris would have done that?
As far as like I said, with immigration policy, there would be a lot of pushback from red states. I imagine that such as Texas trying to create the barbed wire on the border. There was a lot of pushback on that coming from the Biden Harris administration. It's essentially two sides of the same coin. You know, when you have a Republican in office, he's going to go after
Well,
blue
that's
states trying to exercise their state rights. If you have a Democrat in office, they're going to go after red states trying to exercise their state rights.
kind of
And
what I'm
that comes
trying
down
to
to my
get
main
at is
point that I
that
don't like two extremes being the only two options every year.
I don't agree that these things are akin, like, at all. Like, the federal government trying to put pressure on Texas to not barbed wire wrap the border wall, I think, is characteristically different than Donald Trump, like, trying to like decertify or like revoke grants from law firms that win against him in court. Like, that's an absolute, very clear attack in order to chill speech against the government. And I don't think that anything akin to that has ever happened from somebody like Joe Biden, somebody like Barack Obama, or somebody like Kamala Harris.
Yeah, no, and I really agree, and I don't agree with Trump's motion of sending the pro bono request to multiple different law firms throughout the country. I don't think any attorney needs to be. I mean, as a law student, I don't think any attorney needs to be held to that.
I mean, I agree that it's bad, obviously, but I'm saying, like, when it comes to the divisive nature of the country, it feels like one side was probably just going to, at the bare minimum, continue status quo, kind of just keep going with their policy proposals and not really do anything super retributive. Whereas Donald Trump and his administration are actively targeting people who are, trying to levy power against the administration in a completely legitimate way. They're going against people who are suing them. They're going against people who are speaking out against them. They're federalizing the National Guard in order to quell protests and to inflame the protesters in order to become more violent. Like, there's this is completely unprecedented, and to compare it to Joe Biden or Kamala Harris probably keeping more or less the status quo, I think is not true.
Yeah, no, I mean, like I said, that's obviously all wrong. You can't 100% subscribe to anything the guy does. He's a bit of a bozo in a lot of those aspects. So I think if you do, you're either ignorant or more or less hateful.
So I guess, like, on like, if you were to give Donald Trump a letter grade, what do you think you would give him?
B minus C plus.
What is justified a B minus?
Like I said, obviously the tax cuts that I was a big fan of. If you're talking about personal opinion, that was the big driver of the needle. I was in support of RFK, kind of akin to how your last guest was saying, but I do believe when he starts to say things like vaccines cause autism and check yourself with vitamin A, it discredits a lot of the more rational things he says. For example, getting our food on par with the EU and Canada. And I think if we were able to accomplish something like that, from a very base level, get the nutrition of the country at a whole on a higher level, we would see less rates of, we wouldn't be leading the world in obesity, heart disease, and many other chronic illnesses directly caused by your
But
nutrition.
does cutting corporate taxes and adding more food regulations really, like, outweigh the targeting of law firms, or the like, his completely immoral immigration policy, or like his economically misguided immigration policy, or the like Liberation Day tariffs? Like, does this outweigh any of that?
I mean, no, surely not tariffs. Blanket tariffs were extremely stupid. I don't support that. I mean, I do support tariffs against countries such as China that manipulates its currency to gain advantageous trade against us.
Mm-hmm.
But no, I will not 100% subscribe to everything the man does.
Well, I'm not asking you to subscribe to everything the man does, but it feels like, there's a guy who just walked out of, like, like a nursery with a bloody machete, and you're saying that you're giving him a B plus because he gave you a high five on the way in.
Yeah, I mean, with that analogy, yeah, that paints it a bit more bad. Obviously, it was a bit more of a high five. I mean, it saved about $50,000-$60,000 annually since 2017, so that was pretty huge.
Yeah, sure.
Allowed me to further.
I'm not disagreeing that I'm sure the cutting of corporate taxes benefited you personally, but I mean, we're seeing the rights, like the fundamental rights of a lot of groups being like attacked in really, really meaningful ways and in really, really unrevocable ways. We saw that the dude that they deported illegally, he was arguing that, we have no jurisdiction, so we can't even right our wrong. We have to keep him in El Salvador. We saw, like, with the targeting of the law firms, it even if the action is considered unconstitutional, it creates a chilling effect on the First Amendment. No lawyer wants to come out and challenge the government on fear that they're going to be faced with the same type of persecution. This is like, whether it's legal or not, these are things that are meaningfully and not permanently, but long-term affecting people's lives. And it feels like we're willing to justify that just because he cut corporate taxes. That's even though it seems like his policy on the economy is going to be a net negative. Like, we were in the negative of GDP growth.
Yeah, I mean, if we look at his track record for 2016, he surely isn't good for GDP or national debt. I'm not going to tell you that he is.
Okay. I just
But yeah,
don't
I
I
mean,
don't
look at the.
understand how that justifies a B minus.
I mean, look, the guy saved me a lot of money, so I'm a big fan of that. If you want to talk about Biden, I would probably give him about the same grade. They kept the TCJA in place. I was a big fan of the CHIP Act.
But I mean,
I
so
don't think
like,
he was that bad of a guy.
let's say that he was going to have the same tax policy, that he was going to cut corporate taxes, but he was also going to, like, reinstate Jim Crow. We probably wouldn't give him a B minus, right?
Yeah, I mean, look at that. That'd be blatantly unconstitutional issue that should be contested at the highest courts and pushed back against. And I think many of these issues that he's bringing up that are unconstitutional should surely be pushed back on. And that's obviously why we have checks and balances and attorneys at the forefront of protecting civil liberties.
Well, let's say that he's running on reinstating Jim Crow laws, but it's probably going to get shot down by SCOTUS. Would you still vote for him?
If he was running on reinstating Jim Crow laws, I would not. That's would be pretty terrible.
Okay, that's good. I agree. But, like, it feels like we're going to be, so then now the question is, like, what level of targeting can he engage in a group that's not directly yours in order for it to justify voting for him for tax cuts?
I would say, as long as those targeted groups would be rightfully defended under the United States Supreme Court, state laws, whatever have you, it essentially negates any
Well,
issue that could arise there.
in the case of the Jim Crow analogy, or hypothetical, we could assume that SCOTUS was going to uphold the same rights for black people. Had that action gone through, they would have, like, equally upheld the rights to desegregation. But Donald Trump is running on getting rid of it. But you agree that it would be, like, immoral to vote for that, even though,
yeah.
like, our legal system would stay intact. It would prevent any meaningful action actually happening when it comes to discrimination, or at least as much as it possibly can. So what's the difference there?
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't think that there's that much of an issue that's being created for the LGBTQ community. I think the biggest target that he's going after would be the T community, which obviously should still be protected just as much.
Well,
But
the discrimination
at a state level, they are.
the discrimination I'm referencing is literally just, like, immigrants or people that disagree with them. That's the type of discrimination that I'm bringing up, and I'm mostly referring to, like, the deportations, the revocations of student visas, and the targeting of law firms that represent his opponents.
Yeah, I mean, look, I fundamentally agree with the targeting of law firms, and I believe they have, obviously they're law firms, they have the resources to push back against that and do it correctly.
Well,
As
I
far as
mean,
as far as the immigration problem, it should obviously be enforced. We should obviously be, if violent criminals are here, they should be deported.
well,
However, I
hold on.
do believe that due
Let,
process is a human right.
let me push back on the court thing a little bit. Because, or the law firm thing, because, I mean, technically they will have the ability to push back against the government, but, I mean, a lot of the law firms are actually standing back because they don't want to deal with like literally targeting from the federal government against their law firm. Like this could possibly put law firms out of business. So a lot of them are just choosing to stay silent or offer pro bono work to the federal government because of the possible threats of bankruptcy. And the federal government, like people working for the Trump administration, has openly said that they are aiming to bankrupt some of these law firms. So to say that they have the ability to represent themselves in court, that's kind of true. But I mean, but it's to wild personal and financial detriment that they do so.
Yeah, I mean, look, I believe firms would be able to survive even without that. Obviously, if he wants to go after and say he wants to run, say, an immigration firm into the ground, obviously he's, like I said many times, the guy's a bozo and he says a lot of tough talk. You kind of know what you're going to get with him.
I know, but
But
you voted for him though. That's the problem.
yeah, it's the thing, you know what you're going to get. And, obviously not all of that comes to fruition and not all it, because A, he won't do it, and B, it legally cannot.
But I mean, he has done this though. This is something that he has done.
Yeah, no, he has, and they believe there's a way to push back against it.
Yeah, but some are choosing not to push back against it because it's going to come at great financial harm to the law firms and irrevocable financial harm as well.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really see that. Obviously, firms can survive off private parties. They have for quite some time. You don't need to get in bed with the government and 100% subscribe to the government. In fact, many firms make their living off opposing the government and beating them in court. If a law firm can't survive without working alongside the government, I believe that's a fundamental flaw of the firm itself.
We could say it's a fundamental flaw of the firm, but we can think of a world where revoking of government grants to these people is going to hurt them financially, right? Or the idea that, let's not even say the revoking of grants. Let's say the revoking of grants to clients of the law firm, because that's what he did with Perkins Coie, saying that, if you receive government grants and you work with this law firm, then we're going to revoke your grants as well. So not only is it going to be revoking the grants of Perkins Coie, but it's also going to be revoking Perkins Coie of potential clients who don't want to go to that law firm because it's being targeted by the federal government.
Yeah, I mean that'd obviously be unconstitutional to attack a firm based on who they choose to hire and represent. I see no legal grounding in a way that they could legitimately implement that. If a
Sure, but I
firm
mean,
chooses to stand back and stand by, not push back against that,
but
I would say that's fundamentally weak as a firm.
for I think it was half a month, this executive order addressing Perkins Coie was in place. That's half a month of them having reduced clients. That this is like already provable harm that they already endured.
Yeah, no, I mean surely, and that's obviously how the court system works. You're going to have to give it time. You can't. Everything doesn't go through the court in a minute and be deemed unconstitutional when it should be. If there is oversteps, they obviously will be in place for a period of time until the legal system can catch up and do it. In the
Sure,
same way that if you commit a crime, you're going to be free until the legal system catches up to you,
but
when
what
it inevitably will, and you'll be held accountable for what you did.
what I'm illustrating with this though is that you're kind of framing it as like, oh yeah, this is bad. I fundamentally disagree with this, but I mean at the end of the day it's all going to work out in court and it is what it is. But the problem is that the kind of actions that the Trump administration is taking are things that are irrevocable, that the damage is done already. Not all of the damage, granted, but like damage has already been done by the Trump administration, whether or not it was constitutional or unconstitutional.
Yeah, and I mean, if it's provable damage, that would be able to be recoverable in court.
Um Theoretically, but I don't even know. Wait, I this is a gap in my legal knowledge, but I would Nixon v. Fitzgerald not prevent somebody suing for like a monetary claim, like suing the president for a monetary claim?
Not the president itself. Essentially, whatever entity he hands this down on, it would be the grant issuing departments of the government you would have to go after. You can sue the United States government as a whole. You wouldn't be able to sue the president as an individual. It wouldn't essentially be his fault. It would be a suit brought against the United States government.
Okay.
But I mean, yeah, you are correct. The standing president does have a great deal of legal immunity.
Yeah, at least in a, well, now in a criminal context, lol. But yeah, um,
Felonious context.
yeah, um, yeah. I don't know. It feels like giving this kind of activity a B plus because of decreased corporate tax rate
Yeah,
is
B plus C minus. Like I said, I'd find the tax
even a
plan
C
redeemable. I find
minus.
some of RFK's actions redeemable until he starts saying his typical nonsense.
Yeah, sure. And I mean, the only thing that I would say against RFK is that like, when you're the head of the health department, you're kind of in a unique um figurehead situation. Like people look to the head of the health department for health advice. That's something that they necessarily look to the head for. And RFK, I'm pretty sure, testified to Congress that he shouldn't be looked to for health advice. So
Yeah, I mean that's kind of stuff you have to say to cover your own ass when you're going to say something as stupid as to go inject yourself with some vitamin A.
I know, but that's like I think that makes you like a fundamentally flawed candidate. It's almost like saying, um, don't trust any of my legal don't trust any of my legal advice to my from my lawyer. It's like, why are you here then?
Well, I mean, if you're talking about lawyers and doctors, your lawyer wouldn't even be barred if it was RFK because he's not a doctor. So I wouldn't take legal advice from him. But additionally, the his main platform of getting our food on par with the EU and Canada, I think, would just be a great step forward for this country, and additionally, a great step forward of bringing universal health care to the American people.
Well, I mean, there's not a shot in hell that RFK is going to pull any strings for universal health care in the United States. That's not happening under Donald Trump. It's just
No,
not.
I'm not saying he will, but let's say we follow through with his proposals to ban a lot of these allegedly harm causing chemicals and ingredients going into the nation's food supply, which many studies point to being responsible for us being the leader in heart disease, obesity, diabetes, many things like that. It would create a system where universal healthcare would be a lot more palatable to the taxpayer. As I find the main complaint people have with universal healthcare is, well, I saw a bunch of obese guys walking down the road when I went out. I don't want my tax dollars going to subsidize their bad choices. However, if the food supply and nutrition was more sufficient in keeping the American populace healthy, it would be a lot easier, and essentially it would cost a lot less to even enact a system of universal health care. And I'm
I
not saying it has to be all universal. Like we could do something akin to Canada, where you have a private option.
Yeah, sure. I don't buy that the Republicans like the only thing that the Republicans are holding off on when it comes to universal health care is like the health choices of the United States. I don't think that's true. Um
Yeah, I mean, Republican politicians as a whole, I feel like the general populace, though, that's the only complaint that they have is if you look at the health of the country, they don't want to be responsible for, subsidizing somebody's potentially bad
every
choices.
criticism I've heard of universal health care is just vaguely criticism of more government spending, which is going to be the case regardless of if we have um more healthy people or not, and then wait times. Those are the two main arguments that I hear. But I mean, I feel
Yeah, I
like
mean,
being healthy is
wait
not
times
going
are truly
to
a problem.
mitigate either of those two.
Yeah, I mean, wait times are truly a problem, and that's why there should be a public option.
Private
But
option,
if
yeah.
obviously it correct, but obviously if the populace as a whole was healthier, a system of universal health care would be far less
Yeah,
costly to the American
yeah,
taxpayer.
obviously, but I feel like that's not the. I don't think that's the last domino to fall before the Americans are fine with universal health care. I think that that's just something that is going to take a lot of social progression, which Donald Trump is absolutely not going to be delivering to us.
Yeah, no, and I mean a lot of the notable Republican politicians. Obviously, a lot of them are staunchly against it. But the truth of the matter is, many Americans would be in support of it, as many Americans' biggest expense is medical bills and health care.
I
And
don't know
obviously, for
I don't know if that's been borne out. I feel like everything that I've seen showed that the American people are not generally in favor of universal health care. Um, but maybe I'm just looking at outdated stuff. But I know that like a lot of, I think there might be like one poll that um certain you're not like a leftist, but leftists usually say this. I guess populists point to, but I don't. I don't think that there is popular support in the United States for universal health care or like a public option.
Yeah, but again, I think there truly could be once we address the problems that are bleeding our health system so dry. I
Yeah,
mean, there's a whole other can of worms in the fact that
I think that's just a fundamental disagreement that we have. Like, I don't think that that's the last domino that needs to fall before the American people are fine with universal health care.
no, it's not. I think the last domino that needs to fall is banning pharmaceutical advertising, considering the fact that us and New Zealand are the only countries on earth that allow for such pharmaceutical advertising. There's no reason I need to watch a football game and get told to go buy Ozempic and go ask my
I
doctor about
I think
five different
the
medications.
I think the last domino to fall for the American people wanting universal health care is the basically to just stop the demonization of the federal government and stop making people think that just because it's federalized that means it's bad. I think that's probably the last domino to fall, because I don't think any conservative and a lot of left-leaning people aren't going to trust any service that is given out by the federal government.
Yeah, no, and that's true. And obviously, that's why an option needs to remain in place for private insurance companies.
But I'm saying, like, I don't think they're going to want to vote for even a public option because they're not going to trust anything that the federal government does.
My opinion is,
So, yeah, that's just me.
once people realize the monetary value that could be saved and the efficiency at which a system could be won, many more of them will
Well,
support it.
we're also
For
relying
example,
on the American voters being rational people, which um, I don't believe is true. I don't think that the American people are rational because we have Donald Trump as president.
yeah, I mean, he's surely done a lot of things that the general populace as a whole would disagree with. I think, the vast majority of Americans are pro-choice, and that's obviously my stance on the matter. I believe you have a right to receive such treatment if needed. But obviously, you're going to have a president now that rescinded Roe v. Wade and is going to make it a little bit more difficult to allow red states to do that. However, even in red states, I still believe that the vast majority of Americans would be in support of obviously pro-choice. The ones that aren't are mostly a vocal minority. Those that hold on to religious reasons for citing it, things like that. But I simply, nationally unlikable platforms like that, I feel should be dropped from the party as a whole. It's just doing nothing but bleeding centrist votes.
I think the problem that I'm running into here, because I agree with you on a lot of these policy propositions, or at least that, like, we are both in a position to where we could compromise on something like that at the very least. I just don't understand why a lot of these issues aren't deal breakers for you.
I mean, if you want again, it's going to mostly go back to monetary value saved and the fact that most of these issues that are being presented are preserved at a state level. I think this is mostly red states shooting themselves in the I can't say it, popping themselves in the foot. And eventually,
So
when they realize the true harm it's causing to them,
is it just
the
because
chickens will
like
come home to roost.
this is a personal benefit that I'm gaining, and I don't think he's going to be able to cause a lot of public damage? Is that kind of
Yeah, no, but that's essentially yes, especially in blue states where a lot of these policies are protected. I mean, for example, I vote red in national elections, but for local, I mean, I live in a very deep blue metropolitan area. I vote Democrat for state representatives, even congressional national representatives, simply because I have relationships with those individuals. I'm not going to tell you all Democrats are boogeymen.
Yeah, sure. And I mean, we're probably in a similar space. Like I'm not aligned to a political party. Granted, this previous election I voted blue all down ballot because the state that I'm in, the Republicans are fucking crazy Trump dick suckers. But I mean, so I can kind of see your point where you're saying, like, well, there's constitutional bounds, there's checks and balances. He's not going to be able to do anything that's that terrible. But I guess the problem is that we've already demonstrated a willingness from Donald Trump to be completely and utterly lawless. Like, he was somebody who was impeached 2 times in his first term. He's a 34 count convicted felon. He's somebody who tried to take illegal action to overturn the results of the last election. The idea that this person isn't capable of doing extrajudicial harm or doing illegal harm, I just don't think it's true. I feel like even prior to the post-election, we've absolutely demonstrated that he has the ability to kind of skirt around the judicial branch in order to cause public harm. But now even prior to the election, we had demonstrable evidence that he was completely capable of going around the judicial to cause public harm.
Yeah, no, I mean, any individual surely is, and that's obviously why they should be checked and power should be divided amongst three equal branches of government.
Sure, but Donald Trump had a unique willingness to kind of bend the law in order to fit his agenda, that I don't think was present under Joe Biden. I don't think would have been present under Kamala Harris, and I don't think was present under people like Barack Obama or even like George Bush.
I disagree on George Bush. The Patriot Act was fundamentally unconstitutional.
But I mean, that was an act of Congress, so that's not even that's. I don't know if you could necessarily pin that just on George Bush. I think that's a national reaction to 9/11.
That's true.
But like we've demonstrated a pattern, a willingness to disregard law. I mean, Donald Trump literally said we should terminate the Constitution to rerun the 2020 election, or just declare the rightful winner. This is somebody who has shown like a willingness to disregard the law, and it feels like voting for him just because you don't think that he's going to be able to disregard the law, even though he has a concerted effort to do so, feels short-sighted. And I feel like that's been vindicated because he has successfully gone around the law in a lot of cases, or is being held to account for trying to do the exact same thing under like super niche legal theory.
Yeah, and I mean, if you look at the track record from the 2016 administration, I believe many of those more oversteps were correctly reeled in. And just looking at the historical precedent of him being in office, I believe the system is in place to obviously protect the American populace as a whole from him overstepping any executive privileges.
I mean, kind of, but I mean, when we're to the point where he's actively curbing the ability for people to hold him accountable by, completely kneecapping the law firms that would be in charge of doing so, it feels like we're opening the door to a lot more lawless action.
Oh, it's not even the law firms as a whole. It simply just goes back up to the Supreme Court of the United States, which, even though many people say obviously he has influenced multiple different judges onto that court, we've seen obviously with bump stocks, they're not afraid of going against his wishes.
Yeah, sure, or JGG, or this Supreme Court has actually ruled against him throughout this term in a surprising amount of cases. But
yeah, no, that's what I mean. It's not the firms as a whole down there. I mean, obviously, law firms are a front line of defense for the American people. However, to actually exercise checks and balances on a governmental level, it falls to the Supreme Court of the United States, which, if you examine the track record from 2016 till now, have done a fine job of reeling him in.
I mean, so far, but now we're getting rhetoric that the president is open to disobeying the Supreme Court, them ruling for him to facilitate Abrego Garcia's return, and then him saying we're not bringing him back in a meeting with the president. I mean, that feels like a very clear, even whether or not it's technically disobeying, probably not, but it feels like a very clear signal to his base that we are not stopping even if SCOTUS rules us to. That SCOTUS doesn't have ultimate authority, and that we will disobey SCOTUS if we so choose.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, that's obviously a valid point, and it comes down to how they actually hand down these rulings. Obviously, Abrego Garcia should have been brought home much earlier. I believe everybody due process is a human right, but the main thing that people cite there is that they require him to facilitate the return.
Yeah, and there's legal question. Yeah, sure. There's legal question as to what technically facilitate means and what the Supreme Court can compel the president to do. Yeah, I'm familiar with that, but I mean, in no world does the word facilitate mean do nothing. In no world does facilitate mean we're going to go into a meeting with the president of the country that we're keeping him in and talk about how he's never ever coming back to the country. That's like not only not fulfilling the SCOTUS SCOTUS order, but it's actively going against the SCOTUS order. And then to say that it was technically satisfied because we brought him back so we could indict him on human trafficking, is just a technical adherence to the law, maybe, but it's like a totally bad faith engagement by the president. And let's say that SCOTUS compels him to do something that is fully within their jurisdiction, gives him a very clear ruling, but he just doesn't want to obey with it. Tom Homan has already said it doesn't matter what the judges say, we're going to do the deportations. What happens then? What happens when the president just doesn't want to adhere to a SCOTUS order? He's already shown his willingness to go against the law. I don't know, but the signaling from Trump and the past history of being a completely and totally lawless president makes me very uncomfortable with the idea that we're just kind of trusting that he won't do it good enough.
Yeah, obviously, blatant defile of a Supreme Court order. I believe then impeachment would be on the table.
Maybe,
it
but I
essentially
mean,
comes.
impeachment is a partisan issue. That you need Congress, and you need to make sure that the Republican bootlickers who are proposing bills to categorize Trump derangement syndrome as a mental illness, you have to rely on them to do the impeachment. It's a political process. It's not that impeachment is only. It's a political process and it has a real outcome. But the idea that that's the thing that we have to rely on as a last ditch effort is like a bunch of cult members indicting their cult leader is just something that I'm not comfortable leaning on as the last ditch effort.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. You're going to have a lot of Trump loyalists in Congress, especially some that would go to hell and back for him. But when you're looking at the House of Representatives as a whole, that's at least 490 some Americans in there.
Mm-hmm.
And, the job of that is to represent the views of the American populace as a whole. And, my main argument there is if you go out on the street and you get a room full of, let's say, 470 people, there's going to be a few pretty stupid people in there. So, unfortunately, they are representing their populace, even if their populace is extremely stupid and wrong. They are doing what they were elected to do.
Yeah, sure, but the reason that I bring that up is that the idea that our institutions are going to be okay because we have impeachment if he disobeys the Supreme Court, even though the Congress is a completely and totally partisan body, and impeachment is a completely and totally political process. I don't know if I feel comfortable relying on that as our last bastion of law in our country. I feel like the fact that we're getting to the point where it is an open, debatably plausible thing that the Trump administration just ignores the Supreme Court, I think is already a step way too far. And the idea that we're at this point, I don't mean this in a disrespectful way, but we're at this point because people are willing to vote for this kind of activity of somebody who already tried to go to undemocratic routes to install himself as the president, even though he was voted out in 2020. The idea that we're voting for this activity for a lower corporate tax rate just feels really, really not good for the health of this country.
Yeah, I mean, look, I agree. The guy lost 2020, 8 days of the week, and if it was my opinion, the guy should have just shut his damn mouth at that point.
I mean, I agree. If prescriptively, I agree that that's what should have happened, but that's not what happened. And he engaged in all of the things that he engaged in 2020, like lying about cases of fraud, trying to get the vice president to choose the results of the election for him, trying to get as many Congress people to hold up the election certification for as long as possible, just in case the vice president ends up going through with their plan to break the federal law. All of this happened, and then people voted for him to go back in.
Yeah, and like I said, he would not have been the first choice. I think there were many candidates that were better.
I think it's insane that he's any choice.
I agree with that. That's what I mean. That's why I think ranked choice voting would be the way to truly deliver democracy to the American people.
But there's no way that this was the better solution than Kamala Harris.
So to some Americans, it was. To others, it was not. Obviously,
They
that's
they believe that it
polling.
was, but it. I I see no reason to believe why this is a better outcome than Kamala Harris being the president.
I mean, it boils down to a financial bottom line for a lot of people. It boils down to misguidedness from others. Let's say, obviously, when you're campaigning against certain groups, you'll align with those that all are already against certain groups. Yeah, there's plenty of. I mean, look at the Republican Party. Statistically, the lesser educated party. There's a lot of stupid people over there.
I agree. Um, I almost think it's worse though that somebody who is educated and somebody who does fundamentally agree with these principles of our country ended up kind of selling them out for their financial bottom line.
Yeah, I mean, again, it comes back to a state level where a lot of the stuff that is now being done problematically by the president is protected at a state level, and additionally, any oversteps at a federal level have consistently been reeled in. Um,
Not really though. Like look
I
at
mean, I
the deep. I mean the deportation. Like okay, so the deportations under the Alien Enemies Act, there was already two planes that took off before we were able to stop them from shipping people off. So that's like two
yeah,
plane
no,
loads
of
of
course,
people who got their due process rights violated, who are just in CCOT or wherever we're keeping them right now.
yeah, and I definitely don't think that's right. I think due process is a human right. I think it could be done more akin to how President Obama did it with expedited removals.
Yeah, sure.
I
I
mean, he'll
mean,
definitely he's not he'll never be perfect in
the
any way.
idea that these harms are just kind of staying at a state. Oh, sorry. The idea that these harms are just staying at a state level just doesn't seem to be the case.
In red states, it is unfortunately, and unfortunately, those are also the ones that back him the most. I believe once obviously it starts affecting the populace and those who
Okay.
voted for him on the fundamental level, it'll shift the tide.
Okay. I mean, I don't know. I don't want to sound like a broken record. I feel like everything else I would have to add is probably just going to be a reiteration of what I've already said. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, he surely would not have been my first choice. Um, my first choice would have been Tulsi Gabbard. A lot of people aren't a fan of that, but I believe the media treats her like a mosquito because I'd say she's very centrist, non-interventionist, holds more left-leaning social views, whereas holds more conservative-leaning foreign policy and economic views, kind of akin to myself. I see her as one of the best candidates out there. But like I said, the media as a whole treats her as a mosquito, so I don't see her ever gaining legitimate ground. Even now, with getting in bed with the Trump administration in order to probably garnish more support out of the Republican voter base when she eventually does plan to run in 2028.
I mean, I'm just gonna fundamentally disagree with a lot of that because I don't. I think like non-interventionalism as a principle is just not a good principle. There are certain conflicts that we probably should do have a moral obligation to step into. There are certain conflicts that we probably don't have a moral obligation to step into that we should be more isolationist on. But I know for a fact that Tulsi Gabbard was against our involvement in Ukraine and spread a lot of misinformation about Ukraine, and that put a really sour taste in my mouth about her. But I mean, this was my first election. Uh, I didn't really have the chance to pick my primary candidate, but
Yeah, I hear you. I mean, look, I don't think Putin's missteps should be rewarded in any way. We definitely should not allow him to just blatantly annex different countries and regions around him. However, I will say, given the funding and support already given to countries like Ukraine, Israel, the like, I believe
I'm
they
sorry you supported
really don't
Tulsi
need another
Gabbard.
penny of our dollars to defend themselves.
I think that's a strange claim to make when you're supporting somebody like Tulsi Gabbard or somebody like RFK.
Yeah, I mean, look, I support RFK to an extent. Like I said, he loses me when he starts to say the vaccine, vitamin A stuff. That's pretty stupid. in terms of a candidate, like I say, I actually subscribe to most of her policy. Not all. Like I said, if you subscribe to all of any candidate's policies, I believe you're wearing blinders. Um, as a centrist, she probably spoke the best to me.
Okay.
Okay. All right, I'm getting off.
Yeah, no, but good,
Yep.
good talk, guys.
Yep. Good chatting.
Thanks, guys.
Yep.
Yep.
I love you.
Bye bye.
I don't know what to do with conversations like that. It's just so disappointing. I don't understand. It just feels like such a I feel like at the back of his head, I don't think that guy was dishonest. First of all, I think that guy was a very honest person, very straightforward, and not hiding his aims, which I really really appreciate. I think that was a fundamentally honest conversation. I do like that. But I think that in the back of his head, there was something preventing him from engaging with the Jim Crow hypothetical that I asked him. Like, let's say Donald Trump's tax policy was the exact same, but he was running on the instating Jim Crow. Even though it may not be possible for him to do it, even though he would be stymied by the Supreme Court, would you still vote for that kind of activity? Just because it illustrates the fundamental selfishness that it takes to engage and vote for somebody like that. It's just fundamentally selfish, and you're willing to kind of sell out the rights of other people who it might be kind of worse for you to support because you agree that these are fundamental human rights, but you're still supporting the person who's trying to rob them of people. That's almost worse than just thinking that these aren't human rights at all. I don't know. Conversations like that are really, really tough for me though. Because that guy, I can tell that guy was guided well. It's just that there's something blocking him. I don't know what it is. I don't know what the thing is that's blocking him from. Maybe it's just the refusal to admit that like I am fundamentally self-interested and that I'm not really interested in the health of other people in the country, or whether or not it's the refusal to admit that I made a bad decision and I shouldn't have voted for Donald Trump. Maybe it's one of those two. I don't know.